fellow travelers. Welcome to the 46th level of the RPG Cave. I'm one of your hosts, the level 99 human archmage, Ryan Turford, and I'm joined, as always, by the level 99 elf medic, Mr. Garret Bland. Garret, how are you doing this lovely, lovely Monday evening, good sir?
I'm doing good, man. I don't have a drink on me. I'm just chilling.
Oh, geez.
This lovely Monday night, just without a drink at all.
We always
so
do
I'm
this
gonna
super-
just be dehydrated the whole episode.
Oh, man, please don't
basically.
do that. I mean, it just means we can't have a long conversation, Garret, because otherwise I don't like to get, too dried out. Otherwise, I'm going to have to send the Schick
Exactly.
Hydrobot over to your house so he can,
That's true.
recharge you with whatever the Schick Hydrobot does for hydration anyways. But this is the RPG Cave where we talk about RPGs all the time, except for right now where we talk about the Schick Hydrobot. So folks at home, if you want to support the show, there's a number of ways to do that. Number one, you can support us if you're watching on the live stream right now, right out here on youtube.com/carpoolgaming. Hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed already, make sure to hit that subscribe button as well. And then ding, ding, ding. Ring the dangle, aka the bell, for some notifications in case you want to be informed on when our videos are coming out. That all helps the channel grow and get discovered over here on YouTube. It also just helps the algorithm. Likewise, we've got a pretty awesome topic today, Garret, which is, our favorite
Yes, we do.
Women in RPGs. So let us know in the comments below what some of your favorite women in RPGs are. We'd love to hear from you. And then again, all that stuff helps the channel grow. Also, if you're listening on audio feeds, of course, make sure to hit that subscribe button, whether on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play. I mean, don't just go to the webpage and then listen to us that way. You don't want to do that. That sounds like a lot of work. Go there, hit that subscribe button. It'll show up on your podcast app and you're ready to rock and roll. Of course, leave a little rating if you're on Spotify or leave an Apple Podcast review. All that stuff is really awesome. Next up, though, if you want the show on the audio side a little bit early, head over to Patreon. Patreon.com/carpoolgaming is how you do that. Throw a little tip in the old tip jar, and out comes content, including some exclusive shows, which we're going to have some announcements for in a little bit. Also, Garret, I don't know if you noticed this, but I'm wearing an RPG Cave t-shirt. Look at that. Look at this cool merch. We got a merch store. Our Carpool Gaming merch store is over. We have a link in the description of this video if you're watching it on YouTube, or it's in the show notes if you're listening on audio feeds. And we've got shirts for all our shows, all the Carpool Gaming stuff in there, as well as some exclusive designs as well, some cool stuff with Bobby, our mascot, as well as our logo. But also, again, an RPG Cave t-shirt. If you ever wanted to become a level 99 member of the show, get yourself an RPG Cave t-shirt because they're pretty cool. I mean, this is actually, Garret, like, no joke.
It looks really good.
This is probably my favorite shirt out of the bunch because
really?
It looks really cool in person. So I'm very happy with how this one turned out. But then last thing before we get into things, because my throat's killing me because I've been talking so much. We have a very exciting live stream that's happening this weekend. So thanks to everyone for supporting us on YouTube. We actually have a 1,000 subscriber event happening Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on this channel, youtube.com/carpoolgaming. We're going to have prizes. You already know that we have one prize to give away that we announced a long time ago, but we're finally doing the drawing for because we finally hit 1,000 subscribers on the channel. But then we've also got content announcements galore as well. So, I mean, you can expect some pretty amazing announcements this time around. So check us out 10 a.m. on Saturday, or the VOD will be up if you're not up that early on a Saturday morning. I can understand if people like to sleep in and whatnot, but there you go. Anyways, Garret, with all that out of the way, with all the things and stuff out of the way, let's read from the sacred text. God, I'm just falling apart right now. So again, as I alluded to, our topic this week, our favorite women in role-playing games. And this topic was inspired by a comment actually that wasn't even about this show. It was actually on our channel, but it kind of stemmed from this because we got a comment asking us to talk more about, female characters in games when we're talking about games, whether it's a review or on the podcast and stuff like that. And that message actually really resonated with me a lot because I was telling Garret right before we kind of started this call today, like, I'm actually really drawn to female characters in any medium, whether it's games or movies in particular. Like, it all kind of goes back to, when I was a kid and watching movies, and a lot of my favorite movies growing up had like really strong female protagonists, stuff like Aliens, Terminator, like Sarah Connor and Ellen Ripley, for me personally, were just like amazing role models for me personally, even though again we're not necessarily the same gender, but they really resonated with me as characters. And I love to see that in games. Like I'm really drawn to a good game with a great female protagonist. So that's why I wanted to do this show today, and kind of the inspiration for doing this episode. And honestly, like this is an episode that's had to happen sooner or later, because I mean we'll probably do like our favorite characters in certain franchises and stuff like that at some point. But I feel like just doing a broad, topic like this to kind of start that kind of transition, I think is an awesome move. And I'm excited to talk about, our lists and our favorite female characters.
Yeah, me too.
With each other, Garrett, because I know that's something we both, feel pretty strongly about. So there you go. That's the topic of this week. And also, huge thank you to the community, Garrett, because we asked people what their favorite female characters in RPGs were, and holy crap, people wanted to tell us.
There was a lot of feedback.
There was a lot of feedback, and we're going to get to those later in the show. So huge thank you to everyone who wrote in, and
thank you.
Is what was part of the show as well. All right, Garrett, now that I've, hogged the whole show for the last, 8 minutes, I should probably let you kind of talk. So start us off. I want you to start us off. Give me one of your favorite female characters in games. I mean, I came with a list of 10, and then I have a bunch that I can talk about.
Came with a list of 10. That's good.
But I mean, for the most part, we're gonna just make it freeform. I'm not gonna put numbers around this or anything like that. So start us off.
Cool. That sounds good.
What's the first one you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, like before I introduce all the female characters, let me tell you, it was very hard to like even choose like what are the top female characters or whatever, because there were just so many that just pop up in the top of my head. It's like, oh yeah, I remember that character from this game and that game, and there was at least like 10 in my head that's just circling around. So I had to really boil it down to like, okay, what are the select few that I really enjoyed? There's a lot of great female characters out there in RPGs, a lot of dynamic characters, a lot of great personality, and I'm glad that there's some good representation here. Hopefully we'll highlight some great characters in here. So my first character, and I think this would probably be in your list.
Yeah. I imagine we probably have a little bit of crossover at least with this.
Yes. So I'm going to start with Chrono Trigger, of course, with and actually I had to look this up. It's pronounced Maru.
Okay.
But it's actually spelled Marle. It is it's the first female character you get introduced in the game.
Yeah, because you go to Luca's house first, but she's not there, so you don't meet her technically until afterwards.
Yes. And so, kind of like, I don't want to spoil throughout the game if someone wants to get into the story, but
I will say, Garrett, just to interrupt you for 1 second, we're gonna throw out there will be some mild spoilers about stuff, because it's gonna be
very
impossible to talk about some characters without spoiling some mild stuff. We're not going to talk about like major plot points or stuff like that, but just be aware you might get minor spoilers of some of the games we're going to talk about. Anyways, continue.
So this is about Chrono Trigger. I won't go over like big, huge story beats or reveals in this game. I just want to say this character kind of just like grows himself on her own. She doesn't fit the standard like female princess type of character. She is her own independent character that wants to be, after her own goals and with the main character as well. I think she has a lot of attitude, a lot of personality. Reminds me a little bit of a tomboy, but she just doesn't want to get like anything in her way. She just likes to be out there up in front. And I think that really spoke to me a lot when I was playing throughout the game. It's like she doesn't want to be kind of fit into this kind of role that the female is normally in these kind of, I don't know, like even medieval or kind of monarchy type of themes. But I feel like she was really spoke out to me throughout this game. And I actually used, she was a great magic and healing person. So I used her quite a bit throughout. And also there was another female. There's so many powerful female characters actually in Chrono Trigger. They did a good job of mixing that together. But I think Maru was the one that really spoke out to me.
Yeah, I mean, your three party members, all three of the female characters that you obtain throughout the story, I think are actually all really strong characters. And actually the one that was on my honorable mentions list, because I actually didn't have Maru on my list, but I had Luca actually on my honorable mention list, because she's like an inventor and she's kind of quirky, and I just really like her personality. And I think she's also like she kind of is also just outside of the norms of what you'd think of as a female character, or at least, especially when Chrono Trigger came out, because that was again, 94. we just didn't really get female characters that were like tinkers
Right.
and inventors and engineers in that way. So it was kind of cool to see, playing it when it first came out, and kind of seeing that as kind of a refreshing take on a female character, especially again, like we especially don't see those types of characters even regardless of gender, even in your main party. A lot of times you don't
Yeah.
usually have like an inventor or like an engineer in your party in a lot of ways. So it was kind of cool to have Luca in your party. So she was definitely a standout for me from that game as well. But Mara's actually a really good choice for the reasons you talked about, and from some spoilery stuff that again we won't get too into. But again, she's definitely a tomboy. She likes to do her own thing, and I really like her as a character as well. I think that's actually a really good pick, Garrett.
I definitely like her character design, guys. Just look up Maru, Marle, Chrono Trigger, and like the first like character design that pops up, she is just like ready to attack with her crossbow. She looks super fierce. Definitely different than what you saw back then, back in the early 90s, what kind of female characters and what their roles are in video games. This was a huge standout. And it was really cool to see, for sure.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, my first one that I'm going to give a shout out to is one that I know there won't be crossover on, although there will be crossover with the series, I would imagine, because you're probably going to have, it would be almost impossible, Garrett, for you to do this list without a Persona character. I'm imagining you're probably going to have one later. And my Persona character that I wanted to highlight, because I kind of wanted to do this where like, I didn't want to have too many from one franchise on this list. So a female character from the Persona series that I really wanted to shout out, she's actually probably my favorite character across the entire Persona series. And that's, I guess, from Persona 3. She's an android, so she's not a normal human being. You got to get her in like a third to like a halfway point in the game. So she's not a character that you really have from the beginning or anything like that. She's not even really introduced to you until like a certain like cutscene happens, which is actually like a really beautiful cutscene on this beach, which is actually really awesome. But what I really loved about Aigis was her entire character arc from the start of the game to the end of the game, because she almost reminded me of like Arnold Schwarzenegger's character, the T-800 in Terminator 2, where she starts off as like a very cold character because she's an android, but she's an AI. She's got an AI, and she's essentially learning, how to feel throughout the entire experience. And I love kind of like that character arc that she goes on, and then they flesh out her character so much more in the FES version of Persona 3, because there's a separate side story that happens at the end of the game called The Answer, and she's the main protagonist in that story, and it really again like fleshes out her character so much more now, especially when she takes kind of the place of the main character, but she's not like a silent protagonist during those sequences or anything. Like she's very involved in the story, which again, very different from Persona protagonists that you get in a lot of the games. Because for example, like Joker, for example, he might say like, I don't think he says more than 10 words in that game versus the other characters. He just kind of like nods at the other characters, whereas Aigis is just so outspoken. I love that also she has kind of like a goofy nature to her as well. And I love the way that she kind of interacts with the other characters, and the way again they tell her story throughout that entire experience. So I guess for me, definitely probably my favorite Persona character of all time, which doesn't come lightly because Persona has amazing characters throughout all the games. But there's something about Aigis that I really love her as a character, and I had to pick her first, especially for my Persona character for sure. So there you go. Again, nice. I know you haven't played Persona 3, Garrett, so you probably can't relate to any of this.
I gotta do it, man. Like I know it's on Vita, or the FES version, right? Is on Vita.
Well, it's on so it's the portable version that's on Vita.
Yeah, I get confused every time. Oh.
But that version's okay. Like I like the story things they did in the portable version, but the FES version has all the cutscenes, and it's an open world game as opposed to it basically being like a point and click adventure visual novel game. Essentially, is what the PSP version it kind of is. So, which is why what we're hoping if they ever port the game is if they do kind of a fusion of the two, where it has like the gameplay and the cutscenes from FES, but then gives you like the separate story that they had in the portable version. So there you go.
That would be great. Let's see if Atlas ever announces another Persona game ever,
Let's see if they ever
except
announce
for
anything
Persona
as part of
6.
the Persona anniversary besides concerts, Garrett. At this point,
Oh, I'm sure we're gonna get a limited edition mouthwash next month. I can't wait.
I mean, the next announcement's
Alrighty.
next month. You're not wrong. So, mouthwash is probably accurate. But Garrett, what's your next character, my friend?
All right, I'm gonna go along through the Persona train here. I actually picked one female character off of this as well. Um, I, I was trying to think who had like kind of not the strongest personality, but like the one that kind of had the most struggle and most like dynamic throughout. And I think every single female character in the Persona series, I think they do a pretty good job of fleshing out their story arcs. Pretty well. And I think this one kind of hit me most in how much she had to overcome in Persona 5. And I think this is probably your favorite female character as well. And I think Haru
Yeah.
from Persona 5. Yeah. So what she had to go through is a lot of struggle against her father. And like her father was kind of like corrupted with the company and whatnot. And she had to overcome that with the squad. And then also she was kind of like confined into an arranged marriage that would mostly benefit her father's company and her business in Japan. And that's kind of, kind of traditional in Japanese and in general culture itself. But it was cool to see how, recognize what the corruption was and how much she has to overcome and how much her character has grown ever since like she started being with the Phantom Thieves. I think the end of that story arc is fantastic. And then, okay, mild spoiler alert. I mean, like, guys, you beat the game. Like, you beat Persona 5. Like, it's gonna be like a happier ending after you beat everyone. Basically, in Persona 5 Strikers, she is like the head of her father's company. And so she takes on the roles at the same time being a college student, at the same time being all these different roles and trying to learn. And then she's just on a college trip with her friends, overcoming more struggles. So she is out there being super successful, being like a role that, especially in like Japan culture, you wouldn't necessarily see, especially in that kind of like dynamic in that relationship. So I applaud Haru, and I'm glad that the creators created a character like Haru to overcome this type of struggle. So yeah, that's one of my favorite female characters for Persona 5 is Haru.
Yeah, I'm right there with you again. Like, as soon as I started, it was funny because I was definitely like, when I was thinking about characters that I wanted to ultimately be like, Joker's romance throughout the game. I really went through, wanted to go through each character's side story first before kind of like committing to any one person. It was really like Haru's side, like confidant story that really won me over to
Yeah.
wanting her to be that character, because as you talked about, she's such a strong character and has had to go through so much. And not to say again the other characters haven't, because certainly again just learning on story in particular as well was also a little bit heartbreaking as well. So but Haru in particular, I really liked her character a lot. And to all the points that you mentioned, and kind of the other character that I really loved from Persona 5 was also Futaba as well, with all the
Futaba,
stuff
yeah.
that she had to go through as a child, and then kind of learning to just come out of her shell and kind of all the things that go into that. I really resonated with that character in particular because I'm kind of that way a lot of times, because I'm very introverted. So definitely Futaba is another character that I really kind of resonated with. But Haru definitely, I'm glad that you picked her as well, Garrett, for this list, because I think that she's definitely like, of the female characters in that game, I think she's definitely one of the strongest, if not the strongest character.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. A huge standout for sure.
yeah. All right. My next one is one that people can already see coming because they clicked on this video if they're watching on YouTube and they saw the banner. One of the characters I'm going to talk about now is from that banner. And speaking of someone who had to go through some stuff and definitely had some loss to deal with, Velvet Crow from Tales of Berseria is a character that knows, loss and suffering, essentially. And basically that whole game is essentially designed around her trying to get revenge for the death of her brother. She goes through this really traumatic event where essentially her, like, almost like her father figure basically murders her, like, almost like adopted brother. in like a
Hmm.
really cruel way. And then she basically gets locked up in prison after that
Yep.
happens, because basically she now has a giant mutation on her arm, which is why she has a giant arm in all the pictures. Spoiler alert, I guess, for Tales of Berseria. But that's like the first couple hours of the game, you kind of learn that. But I just
Yep.
loved, again, like her conviction, her drive throughout the entire experience really drove me as the player to want to see the end of the story and kind of see how this turned out.
Hmm.
And like how bent she is on doing whatever it is that she needs to do to get her revenge is just something that we just don't see in games very often, especially because it's not very often in games you really play as someone, because she's not really like a bad person or anything like that, but she's like an anti-hero, closer to someone like in the Marvel universe, like
Yeah.
someone like Venom in a lot of ways, where she's not necessarily a bad guy, but she will do whatever it takes, even if sometimes it means making the wrong choice
Hmm.
in order to achieve her goal. And I really love that about her character. Again, it really drew me into that story in a way I wasn't expecting to really resonate with it, especially as it was a prequel to Tales of Zestiria, which is just one of those games where I didn't really vibe with any of the characters in that game. I don't think they were written poorly or anything like that, but I just don't think
Hmm.
they were incredibly interesting. Whereas the characters in Berseria in particular, and we've actually got a shout out for one of these characters a little bit later on, but I think in particular Velvet was just a standout, even among a standout cast of characters you had in your main party in that game. And I really felt like, again, Velvet's character really made that game for me in a lot of ways. So
Hmm.
Velvet Crow definitely up there with one of my favorite female characters of all time, and really just, again, made Tales of Berseria a standout game in an already great RPG series for me personally.
Nice, nice. I played quite a bit of Tales of Berseria. I need to go back and finish it up, but I completely agree with you about Velvet Crow's character. It's literally the guys. It's like the first few hours, like
Mhm.
2 to 3 hours. Stuff goes down, and she is on a revenge streak, ready to go. And yes, as you said, it's the anti-hero. Like she will go through any lengths to get like her revenge, and
Mhm.
it's kind of interesting to see how everything kind of falls apart in there
Yeah, and there's
in the
also some
game.
crazy
So
stuff that happens along the way too, which again I don't want to spoil for
yeah.
anyone who ever wants to go back and play Tales of Berseria. That again just make that entire journey just so much more interesting as well, versus a lot of
Hmm.
RPGs that are out there. And again, a lot of that's just worked into Velvet's character, which I just love to see. So there you go. So next up, Garrett, what's the next character you'd love to give a shout out to?
All right, sounds good. Let's keep on the anti-villain, or should I say villain
Ooh.
streak, because this next one, I think it's going to be a surprise. I don't think a lot of people would mention this character, but I thought it was a standout from the Pokemon crowd, and that is Lusamine from Pokemon Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. She is the main villain of the story, and she is the president of the Aether Foundation in the game. And the reason why I chose her is because I don't really see that much female antagonists
Mhm.
in video games, like at all. I think of Shovel Knight is another one that's pretty big female antagonist, but other than that, I don't have any games on top of
I
my
was gonna
head,
say you
and
probably haven't played enough of the Tales games, Garrett, because there's actually a lot of
that too.
female villains in that series in particular.
Oh, okay, sounds good. But Lusamine was a pretty interesting one where, like, I think it wasn't like out of like bad intentions or anything. She wanted to help Pokemon, but at the same time, she was very obsessed with these certain kinds of Pokemon called Ultra Beasts, and like she had a little bit of like curiosity and revenge from her dead husband. And so she is investigating, and then slowly, as you go throughout the game, you finally realize she is actually kind of corrupted by the Ultra Beasts, and it's kind of interesting to see how that character unfolds. You don't normally see that in like a game that's actually intended for like a younger audience. It's actually kind of see like kind of the psychology behind good intentions, but like bad like results or bad ending to a certain character. And I think they did a pretty good job with Lusamine, to be honest with you. And you had to battle her at the end and save her kind of like from the Ultra Beast story arc. And I don't know. It was I thought it was a good standout for the Pokemon crowd. I just wanted to shout out Lusamine from Pokemon Sun and Moon. Ryan, do you remember this character at all?
I honestly have never finished Sun and Moon, so I actually don't
I
remember
thought
this
you
character.
said you played it, so
I played
okay,
I played
sounds
it,
good.
but I never finished it. So, and
Okay.
I don't remember anything about the story because I played it when it came out. I got pretty far in it, but I never finished it. But it's just been like it's been so
hmm
long since I played Sun and Moon. I just kind of blanked out any of the story parts, unfortunately.
No, that makes sense. So, but yeah, she is the main villain of the Pokemon of the Sun and Moon.
But it's
So
actually I'm actually glad
there
you
you go.
picked a Pokemon character though because it's just one of those
hmm
things too where she must really stand out to you then as a character, Garrett, because I personally, when I play the Pokemon games, like I don't ever feel invested in any of the characters, male
Me
or
neither.
female. And she must again really must have stood out to you in particular if
Yes.
we're talking about her in kind of like the like our favorite kind of female characters in RPGs. So yeah,
Yeah, I had a lot of shocking character development behind her compared to what you see in most other Pokemon games. And it's just like, oh, yeah, that's a villain that, they put a lot of background in, a lot of dynamic, and fit well with the story. I really enjoyed Sun and Moon's story most than any other surrounding Pokemon games, probably ever since like even like Pearl and Diamond, even before then.
nice,
So yeah, that
nice,
is Lusamine from Pokemon Sun and Moon.
sweet. Well, my next one's gonna be a little weird, but stick with me, Garrett. So my next one you're probably familiar with because you played the Disgaea games before. Etna from Disgaea is one of my favorite female characters of all
hmm
time, and it's because I just love how quirky and funny she is. She doesn't take crap from anyone. She has her own pretty
Right.
legion that she bosses around. She's totally a jerk to everyone, and she's like the total epitome of what you'd expect a female demon to be if you were to ever meet one in real life. But she's like super sassy, and I just love like her style of humor and just the way that she manipulates the Laharl, the main character from Disgaea 1, to kind of like she almost like bends him to her will in a lot of ways by like kind of tricking him to kind of helping her out, but then she's actually like secretly, minor spoiler alert for Disgaea 1, she's actually an assassin, sent to kill Laharl essentially. So she's like kind of tricking him into going into battle to kind of like reclaim the underworld that essentially he lost during his slumber, but she's secretly doing this so she can find an opportunity to basically stab him in the back essentially. So I just love Etna's character across all the Disgaea games. Again, I love her quirky nature. I love how goofy she is. And I love the fact that she just does not take crap from anyone. So Etna's a character that I just really loved and was also refreshing to see because a game like Disgaea is also like one of those games where it's like you just don't really ever take it too seriously because it's a very goofy experience. But some of the characters are actually like really likable in that game, or just memorable for different reasons. And Etna in particular is just like a character that when I think of Disgaea, I always think of Etna when I'm thinking about that game in particular. So I definitely had to pick Etna for this list, and also I just love to see kind of like comedic characters on a list like this too, because like we don't really
hmm
get a lot of comedy in video games, and a lot of times if we do, it just never sticks the landing. But I really feel like some of the comedy in Disgaea in particular, and a lot of it kind of revolves around Etna's character. You love
hmm
I love to see that kind of thing in games. So, and it's definitely rare for games to see something like that. So Etna is my next pick from Disgaea, from the Disgaea
Nice.
series. I think she's really awesome. So there you go.
Well, I'll definitely just jump on the comedic like craze streak as well. I actually haven't met Edna before. Maybe I have in Disgaea 5. I'm just not sure yet. But it instantly thought of me of this female character from the Borderlands series, which okay, it's a shooter, but it's a role playing game.
Yeah,
You got
it's
skill
close
trees,
enough.
you got classes. Um, and she just got a recent game that's all about her, centered around her, and that's Tiny Tina. Oh my goodness, she is such a cool character. She is very comedic, very wacky, very crazy. And they really explored it, especially in Borderlands 2, kind of like the history behind her craziness and like why she wants to, you know, she's really good. She's really effective at like doing harm against like bandits and stuff like that with like bombs, and like she always puts it with a smile on her face. And like the quest line that you do with her, it's kind of interesting because she's also on a revenge path too with her past. and then like you kind of explore more of like her kind of her suffering and inside more in the DLC of Borderlands 2. So even though like service wise she is this goofy, wacky, super funny, super almost like kind of to the point of insanity, but that's not because of like her personality or anything. It's just because she's been through a lot as well, and she's been through a lot of emotion. And so yeah, she really speaks to me as a character, as real like going through a lot, but also being a very like outgoing personality throughout the Borderlands series. I still haven't picked up Tiny Tina. I wish I'll definitely will pick it up later this year and
It'll go
plan
on
to
sale
play
at some
it.
point.
Oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, guys, if go through, I mean, I always recommend Borderlands 2
Mhm.
over all the other games. So Tiny Tina definitely speaks out to me in that game,
Yeah. Well,
for
you've even
sure.
got the DLC is now just its own separate game because of how, successful
Yep,
that DLC was. And a lot of it just plays into Tiny Tina's character. Like one of the things I love
it
about
is.
the new game Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, because it's a game that's fresh on my mind because I just played it recently and I really love that game, is like you'll be going through the game and then she'll be like telling the story about, where your character is going next essentially, but then she'll like change the story halfway through and be like, well, actually, no,
Yeah,
there was just a big battle going on in the middle of the field that you're in. And actually, there's giant cannons like the size of buildings there. And she just goes off on these like really goofy
she's
tangents with
hilarious.
a lot of the other characters that she's with. And yeah, she's like a really funny character. But there's also like moments in Tiny Tina as well where I thought that she was also really endearing as well because you learn more about Tiny Tina's past in that game, and,
Hmm.
and and sometimes it actually gets a little bit emotional as well.
It
So I
definitely
actually
does.
I like her as a character as well, Garrett. I'm glad that you brought her up because I wasn't even really when I was coming up with my list of characters, I didn't even think of Borderlands in particular. But
Hmm.
I think that's a good character pick, Garrett. Tiny Tina
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
for sure. All right. Well, the last of my comedic characters that I wanted to throw in here, but and she's actually a character that's kind of similar to Etna, so I'm not going to stay with her too long. Is from a
Hmm.
little old game that Garrett's never played before because I know he's never played this series before, and that's from the Lunar series. Jessica from Lunar Silver Star Story. Basically, she is the daughter of one of the four major heroes that essentially like had saved the world a long time ago, but her dad was like the barbarian of the party. So she's like a really like physically strong character, but her dad didn't want her to essentially end up like him and be a warrior. So he basically sent her off to become like a priest essentially, or become a cleric essentially. So she kind of serves as your healer throughout the game, but she's more than that. She's a physical attacker that can also heal your party as well because she has like these metal gauntlets that she wears or claws, and she'll like attack the enemies with claws, which is really cool. But what I like about her character is she's really comedic throughout the whole journey, but she's also like super sassy, like Kato levels of sassy in a lot of ways to kind of draw a
Nice.
comparison within our own community. Like I really love Jessica as a character, and she's got this, on again, off again relationship with one of the characters in your party named Kyle, and they're like bickering and arguing all the time. But she's like a really like mentally strong character, but also she goes on this great arc for her character throughout the game where again there's a lot of touching moments with her as well, and kind of touching moments both between her and Kyle's relationship, but also just her relationship with the other characters in the game. So like she's definitely like one of the standout characters from that game, which is again like one of my all-time favorite RPGs, and kind of like one of the games that really got me into RPGs. And I couldn't really ask for a better kind of female introduction to this RPG series than Jessica. So again, I won't touch it on too long because again, I'm probably one of the only 5 people who listen to this show who've ever played this game. But of that game in particular, again, that's another game that's also really has some great female characters as well. I really like
Hmm.
Luna and Mia as well, like your two other party members, as well as some of the other like villains as well are also female as well, like Zenobia as well. Like I really like her character a lot. So yeah, I think Lunar is actually a really good game if you want like really cool female characters, especially in an old school game. Because again, that game came out in '93 on the Sega CD, so very old
Hmm.
experience. But had to include Jessica on my list, even though again, Garrett has literally nothing to say about this. So
Sounds
there you
good,
go.
man. I'm sure she's an awesome character in that game,
Good
and I
response, my
will
friend.
eventually play it,
I love how every
when
time we have a conversation, it's just like, I'm just building your backlog. I'm just adding 10 more games to it. I've got the shovel.
gonna be on my Retroid Pocket 6. That's what's gonna happen, basically.
Good Lord.
All right.
All right.
Okay, so my last two characters really speak out to me the most.
Okay.
In terms of just like characters in general, I think. First is from The Witcher 3. And I think there's a lot of strong female characters in the franchise, and especially in the game. And of course, there's three main females characters that you kind of like is reoccurring throughout every single game, and that's Triss, Yennefer, and Ciri. And I think Witcher 3 really spoke out to me for Ciri in general, because even though you're Geralt and that's the main character and that's what you play throughout the game, and basically the story of Witcher 3, you're trying to catch up to see where Ciri went throughout the game. And at the same time, there's this dark elven clan called the Hunt that's also trying to capture her because she has special powers other than being a Witcher. But you slowly get to realize that the game is not about your character, like much at all. It's about her and her memories and her past, and then like her journey throughout the game. And so when you eventually meet up with her, it's not like a damn in distress, like, oh, I'm coming to save you, Ciri, from your struggles or conflicts. It's like, no, you are like kind of like relatively like a father figure to her, and like you gotta let her figure out her own decisions throughout the game. She is like an adult now, or like young adult in this game, and there's many endings with Ciri and Geralt's line, and I really enjoy that. It's you can be closer than ever before and like let her do her own thing, or you try to be too controlling and then she becomes rebellious and like goes the other way, or she becomes like the emperor or whatever at the end, or whatever happens. So I really enjoyed Ciri's character, not just because she's super powerful and main character, whatever, but that's what the game is focused around, is her story, her arc. What is she ending up to be? She was incredibly powerful in terms of like when you ever play her, you play her in certain flashbacks in Witcher 3 as well. And that's why I really like the story of Witcher 3 is Ciri's storyline itself and the characters throughout the game, trying to help her in general. So, yep, that's one of my favorite characters of all time, and also especially in The Witcher 3 is Ciri.
Nice. Well, ultimately, I never actually, unfortunately, during my playtime of The Witcher 3, I never got to meet Ciri because I got 40 hours into the game and you never run into Ciri. You're just chasing Ciri.
It's hard, man.
But yeah, I never got there, so unfortunately, I just can't really relate. But I hear a lot of people actually say Ciri all the time, even though we actually got a couple Witcher responses that we'll get to, but neither one was for Ciri. But I know there's a character that people really love as well for the reasons you talked about, Garret. So I'm glad that you decided to include her, even though, again, I wish I had more to say, but it's just, haven't really played enough of The Witcher to be able to talk about it. So there you go. Well,
all right.
My next character, and also, again, I have some more characters as well, but I'm going to kind of limit it to two more as well, because we don't want the show to go all night. We got a lot of listener questions to talk about as well. And I'll do like honorable mentions at the end and kind of.
We'll do honorable mentions for sure.
So my next one, I have to talk about this one because this is one that, really affected high school Ryan a whole lot, which is, when I played this game, which just reveals my age because I don't think Garret was very old when this game came out, but that game was Final Fantasy VII, and that character is on the thumbnail for this video, and that's Tifa Lockhart. I mean, yeah, in Final Fantasy VII in particular, you have two really strong female characters in your party in the form of Aerith and Tifa, but I'm definitely more on the side of Tifa. I really just relate to her character a lot more. I love kind of her backstory, which I will not spoil for anyone because they didn't actually do it yet in Remake Part 1. It will be in Remake Part 2, where they talk more about kind of Cloud's backstory, and because Cloud and Tifa were kind of like childhood friends who basically grew up in the same town together. They're kind of reveal that story. But I love like how her backstory like ties into Cloud's backstory though, and like all the stuff that she's had to go through over time, and basically going from basically being reduced to nothing to then kind of building up this bar in the slums in Midgar, and then helping build this like anti like this environmentalist kind of terrorist group essentially. Like I think it's like just a really interesting character arc where essentially they're trying to save the planet essentially is kind of like what they're trying to do over in
That's
Avalanche.
True. Yeah.
But also she's a martial artist as well. So she's like a physically strong character as well. Definitely one of my go-to party members throughout that entire experience. And just again, I love her relationship with Cloud and kind of like all of the things that she wants to tell Cloud a bunch of stuff, but she knows that she can't. And she has to kind of like pull back a little bit and can't say everything that she wants to all the time, and has a lot of struggles that kind of come along with it. And again, for anyone who's out there who's played the full game, the original one, you kind of know some of the stuff I'm talking about. But I really love Tifa as a character, and she's definitely a character I related a lot to growing up in high school in particular. Like even though I didn't see some of the stuff that she had to go through in particular, but like the way she interacts with people and stuff like that, it's something that I feel like I kind of approach personal situations in a lot of the same ways that Tifa did in those games. So I really enjoyed playing through the game and kind of seeing like her story throughout that entire experience and how her character changed from the beginning of the game towards the end. And I think she's an integral part to Final Fantasy VII, and definitely one of my all-time favorite video game characters, let alone just female characters in particular. So Tifa Lockhart, I had to include her. I know other people talked about it as well in the comments. We'll get to those in a little bit. I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention Tifa, or even just a Final Fantasy VII character in general.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right.
Sounds good, man.
Garrett, give me your last one. Who's the last one?
All right, my last female character. I think it's actually from Xenoblade Chronicles 1 Definitive Edition. And again, there's a lot of strong female characters in that game as well. But I want to specifically point out one of my favorite ones that is an central role in the DLC as well. And that is Milia, who is one of the later party members you get in the in kind of like your group together in the first game. And she is what you call of the High Intia race, which is like a separate race. There are various factions and races in the game. I guess you can refer to them as like more of like a higher, like they think of them as a higher species. They're taller, they're stronger, they're more angelic. They have a lot of magic power behind them. And Milia is like the princess in the kind of like the royal like monarchy or whatever. And she goes through a ton throughout the story. And it feels like kind of like a side bit, especially in the first game, but they really close it up in this DLC. And what she had to go through is a lot of struggle depending on species and race, because she was actually born from her father is the king of the High Intia race, and her mother is Hom, which is like the human equivalent in this game. And so there's a lot of power struggle versus other close family characters throughout the game, especially in the first Xenoblade Chronicles. And then the way how everything shook out at the end in the DLC, she was trying to get all the High Intia race back together, and her resolution in the end of the game really made me emotional. It's like, wow, she pulled it off. She really got people together in the end, and now she is fit to rule. Like her character's so dynamic from the beginning. She was so shy, especially when it involves like being like the next in line, leading the High Intia race, and then how everything just comes out at the end of the first game and into the DLC. It's interesting, kind of like a reborn or going through that major arc. So yeah, she really spoke to me as a character in the story throughout. Made me teary-eyed at the end that she she's basically fit to roll at the end, and she is definitely in Xenoblade Chronicles 3. You see her in a mask, and I'm like, okay, I gotta play the second game now in Torna Country before I get into 3, because I definitely want to see how this the story shakes up in 3, and I'm sure she's gonna play a pivotal role in that storyline as well. So yeah, man, Milia, she was super cool. Always had her in my party. She was really good with the magic attacks. So
Nice. I mean,
had
that's
to
one game I
put her in my
really
party.
need to get to. I've got the collector's edition right over there on my shelf.
Oh
but
man,
I just haven't opened it and played it yet. And I definitely like.
that's
I'm in
okay.
your boat. I was like, oh, I could probably knock out both Xenoblade games over the summer because Xenoblade's 3 is coming out in September, right? And then it just moves up to July. I'm like, well, there goes that plan.
It's like, okay then.
So maybe I'll just play Xenoblade 1. Because I played Xenoblade 2, but I just don't. I think the performance really kind of killed that game for me. But Xenoblade 1 I've heard runs a lot better. So I should play it at some point.
It does.
Definitely before 3 comes out at least. But I'm glad that we included a character in there because I just haven't had a chance to play it yet. So, but I know a lot of people really like the characters in Xenoblade. So I'm glad we can include one here as well. And then my last character to round things out. I mean, we talked about anti-heroes earlier, and in theory, I could have thrown that in with kind of the anti-hero talk. But it's another game, Garrett, that came out while I was in high school. So again, this is a character that I really enjoyed. High school Ryan enjoyed at the time, for completely different reasons than Tifa. And that character was Rose from Legend of Dragoon. It's a game that I know a lot of people really like. It's kind of like a cult hit. But basically, Rose is a person with a dark past who's maybe done some really, 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 really bad stuff. But she basically, after just bumping into the main character Dart in the woods when he's fleeing this green dragon, they kind of pair up together, and she kind of acts as the party's mentor throughout the entire experience because she has the ability to become a dragoon using this crystal that allows her to basically throw on this cool armor based off a different dragon that exists in the world, and her dragon that she's based off is the Dark Dragon, which again kind of plays into her storyline that again I'm not going to kind of spoil here because I think a lot of people are actually going to get to play that game for the first time pretty soon next month because I think it'll actually probably end up being one of the PlayStation Plus premium tier games.
That'd be cool.
Because it is a first party Sony game, so I imagine it'll probably be there. So she's I love her redemption arc though throughout the entire experience where she can't forgive herself for all the things that she's done in the past, and she's almost tormented by her past in a lot of ways. But throughout the experience, she kind of learns to kind of forgive herself and basically live in the moment rather than living in the past, essentially. And she's a character I really enjoyed, getting to know throughout that entire experience, and kind of I love the way that she interacts with the other characters, in particular, with Dart, the main character. And also, again, she's the mentor to the rest of the party members. So I really like her character in particular. And it's definitely not very often, too, that when exploring RPG party dynamics, it's not very often that the veteran in the party is usually a woman. A lot of times it's usually a grizzly old man with a beard or a wizard of some kind. So it was really refreshing and cool to see kind of this anti-hero that's also the party's mentor, even though again they're not necessarily doing evil things, because again she's kind of on the road to redemption in a lot of ways. But Rose in particular is a character that I thought was super interesting and cool in that game, and again that some of the twists you find out with her later in the game are just really awesome. So Rose is a great character in Legend of Dragoon. I hope people actually end up getting a chance to play it pretty soon next month from the time we're recording this, because I think it'll probably be in the PlayStation Plus collection. If not, it's on your Vita, so go play it on your Vita.
And it's on your Retro Pocket 7. Yes.
There is that too. Garrett, just another game just on the pile. We're just doing this. Just shoveling games on.
Boom.
Exactly.
There we go.
But there you go. So real quick before we go to the audience as well, I think you ran through all your characters, right, Garrett? Did you have anyone else?
Yeah, I have some shout outs, but yeah, I went through all my female characters I wanted to detail out for sure. Yeah, because
I figured we'll just quickly do honorable mentions, because the other couple characters that I only had 4 more that I wanted to just quickly shout out. Y'shtola from Final Fantasy XIV. She's one of your kind of the main party members of the Scions of the Southern Dawn, and she kind of goes on a crazy arc throughout the entire experience from kind of the base game to the final expansion. And I just really love her character as well, and she's also just a very sassy character as well, which is a character trait that I seem to really like a lot with female characters. Then you've got Aya Brea from Parasite Eve. She's kind of the main character in Parasite Eve, and she's a cop essentially who's basically thrown into this impossibly dire situation where, there's these crazy monsters in New York City, and she basically has to, find a solution to kind of fix things. And again, I just love like how strong she is as a character. And then I've got Kid from Chrono Cross. She's kind of the main female protagonist of Chrono Cross. She talks with an Australian accent, says a lot of Australian things, but she, even though she's not from Australia, because, again, it's the Chrono Cross world, but she's basically an orphan, and you kind of like just learning her backstory is like super interesting and cool. And that's what I liked about her character. And then last but not least is a character from Shining Force 2, which just came to Nintendo Switch Online this month. And that's Sarah. She's one of your main party members who you actually start the game with. And she starts just as like this low level priest who barely does any damage and stuff like that. And isn't really like, she's like kind of like the party's healer for the most part, but she's kind of quiet for the first little bit of the game. But as the game goes along, she becomes like more of a verbose character and more, just she's more extroverted throughout the entire experience, to the point where she eventually trains to become like a martial arts master and stuff. So she's a really cool character as well. And I love Sarah as well. I think she's a great character. So those are kind of my honorable mentions / shout outs before we move on.
Mm-hmm.
But
all right, well,
go ahead.
Go for it.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so shoutouts for me. I can't believe we didn't have a female character from Fire Emblem in our top list.
I purposely did that because of all the comments that we got. But
all the comments. There's so many of them. Well,
yeah,
for sure, Edelgard from Fire Emblem Three Houses, I wanted to shout out. I did pick that route, and she was really cool to like just be with and have a companion throughout the entire game. And seeing like her character from beginning to end, depending on which route you choose, it can go in very different ways. But her personality is very strong. She is very assertive. She is a leader, which you don't really see in a lot of other female characters. She is there leading her team and ready to be successful from day one. She is really go-getter. And so that's what I really liked about Edelgard. I also want to mention Red from Transistor, who is the main character that lost her voice and trying to get her voice back. Aurora from Child of Light in her story arc was really amazing, and she is central like of the whole game. So I didn't want to mention it. Just go play Child of Light. That's why I think we may have said it 1 or 2
times in the show, Garret.
Yeah, like just go, guys. It's like a 7-8 hour game.
It's
like,
literally on every platform, even the Wii U. Just go play it.
It's the shortest RPG you'll ever play, so just go play it.
I don't know about that. There's a lot of shorter.
I don't know about the shortest. That's actually, we should do an episode.
Half Minute Hero RPGs. Is definitely a really short RPG, Garret. But
Undertale.
Oh yeah,
okay.
Undertale too.
Anyways, and then Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn, I wanted to shout out as well. She is really cool throughout the first game. I didn't play Forbidden West yet, but she was really awesome in the first game. And then lastly, I want to mention a female character from Skyrim, Serana. She is actually in the DLC, Dawnguard, and she is one of the ancient bloods and the daughter of the Vampire Lord. And she has some ulterior motives to go against her father, which I thought was pretty interesting. And so she might help you out throughout the story arc, depending on which choice you choose. So There you go.
Nice. Well, let's get to some of our listener inquiries. So folks at home, if you would like to be part of the RPG Cave and have your voice heard, then there's a number of ways to that. Number one, if you're watching on YouTube or right now, if you leave your question in the comments below, we'll read it on next week's show and we can answer it that way. Or if you join the Carpool Gaming Discord, which the links are in the show notes as well, we put out basically a question post every single Monday afternoon, just giving you the topic and asking for your questions there, so you can write to us there. Or you can follow us on Twitter at Carpool Gaming, and we tweet out the same kind of question post every single Monday afternoon, and you can be part of the show that way, just like Nagachaka at Nagachaka did on Twitter. And here comes the Tifa train, Garret. First, Nagachaka says, Tifa, Lockhart all the way. She was my main in Final Fantasy VII Remake, because if you remember in that game, you can switch to any of the party members at any time, and you can kind of make any of them the leader. So it sounds like that's what Nagachaka did. And there's nothing more satisfying than using her ferocious attacks to stagger enemies without even breaking a sweat. And Goombala, I hope I pronounced that correctly, from Paper Mario is a close second. And also Marcus O'Neill on the Discord also reacted to our question post with a Tifa GIF. So I'm just going to silently acknowledge that Marcus O'Neill also acknowledges Tifa Lockhart as well. But Goombla, I've never played Paper Mario, so I don't actually know.
Me neither. I need to play that one.
It's on
another
Nintendo
one
Switch
in the
Online.
backlog. Oh, it is. Yeah, that is correct. It is on Nintendo Switch.
And I actually have a copy of Thousand Year Door up there somewhere. So there you go. Well, next up, Mike at Blaze0923 asked something. First of all, I want to say a huge shout out to Mike because number one, he actually writes in almost every single show, regardless if it's this
thank
show
you so much, man.
or the Xbox Drive. But he actually had like a really well thought out answer, and I really love this response. So I'm gonna read this one from Mike. So Mike says, I asked my daughter who recently played her first playthrough of Valkyria Chronicles 4, and she said Lena Shuin for being an amazing sniper, standing in for her brother Kai. She stands up for herself and she is nice to her friends. For me personally, I'll give a shout out to Nina from Breath of Fire. If I had to narrow it down to a single Nina from the series, I'll go with Breath of Fire 3's Nina. It's great to see her go from a naive child to a resolved adult over the course of the adventure. So I'm so glad Mike actually, asked his daughter about this.
That's so cool.
That's super cool to know. And yeah, I actually really like Lena's character in their Valkyria Chronicles 4 for the reasons that your daughter actually brought up, Mike. Again, I think she's she's kind of just thrown into this war situation. Don't get me wrong, she's still like a trained soldier, but she's basically thrown in kind of like the middle of the battle because her brother essentially is basically taken out of the battle. So I really liked her character in that game, and it's awesome to see kind of your daughter actually getting into a game like Valkyria Chronicles, because I know it's kind of a bit of a dorky game. And Breath of Fire is a series that I've played some of them, but I haven't played all of them. Like I've only played Breath of Fire 1. And so I only know Nina from that game. And she's kind of, as you describe her, where she's kind of like, she kind of just is like more of a naive child. And I never really got to see her full character arc because I didn't play any of the other games. But I'm glad you brought up Breath of Fire, because that's not a series we get to talk about at all in the show.
No, we don't mention that much.
Just because, again, like neither of us have really played those games, but I know people like them. And that's a Capcom RPG series, believe it or not, that it's never really come
Capcom
back.
needs to revive another RPG series. There we go. Revive it.
Exactly. Well, next up, Donnie Reese at Eat the Hype.
What?
Yeah. Garrett, after 46 shows, we finally get Donnie to interact with us for the show when talking about female characters. So Donnie at Eat the Hype on the Discord didn't actually say his response in words. He gave us 3 separate gifts in response.
Cool.
And the gifts were from Camilla and Corrin from Fire Emblem Fates. He likes both those characters. Good. And then On from Persona 5 as well.
On is cool.
I think those are really good shoutouts as well. I think those are some good picks. I actually really like Camilla a lot. She kind of plays like the big sister kind of route throughout all of Fates, regardless of which you pick, even the one where you guys are fighting each other. And she's like, she still treats you like a little sister if you play as female Corrin, but she's just going to murder you instead. But I love like her like playful personality and stuff like that. I think she's a cool character. And then definitely On as well, I think is a great character too. So
On is great. I like On a lot. The first time you interact with her and like her struggles too. And let me tell you, Persona does a really good job of like doing a story arc that overcomes like struggles and everything, and is especially in female characters too.
Yeah, for sure. Especially with that whole arc in Persona 5 just being mostly about On and just kind of what she's going through. I think it's really cool.
That's true.
So, well, next up, Joe After Work, the internet superstar himself, has written in and says, Tara Branford from Final Fantasy VI has and will forever be in every fiber of my being going forward. That's a good answer too. And actually, that's what I could have brought up earlier, but I just didn't want to, overload my list with a lot of Final Fantasy characters. But it was also, she was like the very first Final Fantasy character that was like the main protagonist for a game. Was Terra, essentially. In fact, like when you go play a game like Dissidia Final Fantasy, which is kind of like the Final Fantasy fighting game, and they're basically pick out all the main characters and the main villains from each game, she was like She was the only female there besides just Shola, essentially, which is just
Wow.
crazy to think about. As long of a series as Final Fantasy is, she's really like one of the only main characters. But she was actually a really memorable character from that game because she kind of introduced kind of the Esper system to your party, which we talked about last week on the skills episode, actually, oddly enough. And I think she's actually a pretty cool character as well, and kind of I like learning her story. So. There you go. Again, just more games to add to Garrett's backlog. Final Fantasy VI. Of
course.
When the Pixel remasters come out, Garrett, you actually should check that game out because it's actually really good. But then
Sounds good.
Next up, the Muffin Mon, aka Kevin Ainsworth, who was here actually earlier in the chat at Project X Attack. Make sure to go check their stuff out on YouTube as well. Kevin says, "God, there are so many characters to choose from. Yukiko from Persona 4 Golden. I love Eleanor and Kisara from Tales of Berseria and Arise, as well as Edelgard from Fire Emblem Three Houses." So there you go. Kevin's actually on your side with Edelgard.
Wait.
I think that these are all great examples of strong female characters who followed their own convictions, but I also like when female characters grow. Take Bernadetta or Happy from Fire Emblem Three Houses. Each character starts off shy and reclusive due to their past trauma, but they start reclusive due to the past drama that they believe is their fault, and they grow over the course of the game. I apologize, I can't read, folks, but there you go.
No, it's okay.
I kind of like, again, what Kevin's kind of explaining here is I like kind of the idea of the character arc that he's kind of pointing out with some of those characters and how they grow for those games.
Some great examples there. Yeah.
Yeah, and Fire Emblem I think is actually a really good series for that too, because you especially because many of them have time skips, and you kind of like learn so many different things about the different characters as you go through. But
yeah, and all of them too. There's so many different character arcs. Like, of course, there's a lot of strong female characters in the Fire Emblem games.
Yeah, and we're not even done with Fire Emblem characters yet, so stay tuned. But next up, Brian Eck says, "I just finished The Witcher 3 recently, and I'd have to say my favorite female character is Yennefer." He even did the dots, so he didn't want to. He wanted to build suspense a little bit, Garrett. So I'm sorry, not seeing.
Yennefer's a great one.
Yeah.
She is an excellent female character. In Witcher 3. She is like one of those like, I don't need you, Geralt. I can just be on my merry way and just like live my own life, and like I don't need you at all. Which is she has a very sassy, very independent personality, but she is very caring towards Ciri as well, and thinks of her as a daughter as well. So there's a lot of interesting relationships going on between Geralt and Yennefer and Ciri throughout the game. I love it.
So oddly enough, replying to Brian Eck was once again Nagachaka, who voiced his displeasure with this comment and said Triss instead. So there you go. She replied with a grumpy Triss kind of gif, and then hashtag Team Triss, essentially. So
really,
yeah. So
I'm not gonna get into the whole character arc. There's some messy stuff when you vote Team Triss or Team Yennefer.
I just like it how between you, Nagachaka, and Brian Eck, Garrett, we've now covered all three of the Witcher 3 female characters, which is pretty cool.
Not all of them, but yes, the strongest.
Well, the three major ones.
Most important. Yes.
Well, next up, Kaboski on the Discord says Lucina from Fire Emblem Awakening is their favorite character. I mean, Lucina, I think, is like a character.
I love Lucina.
The character that's seen some stuff, but also I like like how you get introduced to her at the beginning of the game, and then kind of how she plays into kind of the last half of the game. I think is really cool. So I love her
very, very cool
too. But
yes.
All right, next up, I hope I can pronounce this name correctly. I know for a fact that this name is a Final Fantasy 14 character name. So let's see if I can pronounce this correctly. This is Jennison Rael, in brackets, Nick, at Jennison VT. I'm guessing that's either a Mokote or a Vieira name, if I'm not mistaken. Anyways, though, their question is, I mean, any other choices are wrong. It's all about Aya from Parasite Eve. A close second is my own character from Final Fantasy XIV.
That's up.
I mean, even the funny thing is, because I play Final Fantasy XIV, I already knew that this name was a Final Fantasy XIV name, but even that just kind of further cements it as... I mean, the Warrior Light's great in Final Fantasy XIV, but the Warrior Light doesn't say anything, except for the things that you put in the input box. So I don't know how powerful the character she is, and except for the fact that she's very overpowered in the game itself. But beyond that, as far as the character dynamics are concerned, I don't know if well, actually, I probably agree with it at least a little bit. But yeah, I think it's a great choice. Again, Parasite Eve is just an amazing game that I just wish it comes to modern consoles at some point, because I think she's a great character and that game's awesome. So there you go.
PlayStation Plus, man.
Heck yeah. All right, next up, Buck at Bucklepuff on Twitter says, for me, it's Nia from Xenoblade Chronicles 2. She's down to earth, sassy, and hilarious with some fantastic lines. I particularly love after losing a battle when she says in the great Welsh accent, I'll bash you up proper next time, I swear. I actually remember that from my time actually playing Xenoblade Chronicles 2.
I think I remember this too.
Yeah.
Hold on, let me see if I'm thinking of the same. Yeah. It's everyone's favorite female character in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Nia. Yeah, she was super cool. I completely agree with you, Buck. Yeah, she is very cool. I wish I played more in Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I will go back to that for sure before 3.
I mean, that's a pretty bold statement because that game's coming out in 2 months, Garrett.
No, it's not 2 months. Come on, man. It's 3 months. Like
July is
it's a little less than 3 months.
That whatever, man.
Yeah, it's the end of July though.
Okay,
I'll get there.
I'll give you that. It's more like 2.5 months.
I'll probably finish S&T 5 by July and then just go straight to 3.
Good Lord.
That's probably what's going to happen.
I'm never getting Garrett to play Golden Sun ever at this point. All right, moving on before I get all sad here. We got a bit of a train going with our final 3 responses, and they all kind of link together. We're going to start with Ryan Craig at the Mathman1024 on Twitter, who says, Rita from Final Fantasy IV is one of my favorites. I love her combination of black and summoner magic. Veronica from Dragon Quest XI won me over with her starkiness and strong offensive magic as well. Jade is another great one from that game. She was such a powerhouse. Unfortunately, I just didn't really play enough of Dragon Quest XI to be able to comment, but we're going to give you a bit of a theme before I let you jump in with this one, Garrett, because Miss Chop at Miss Chop on Twitter says, every game, in brackets, most recently Elden Ring, that lets me create a female character, I create one with green hair and name her Rita. Also indicating that Rita from Final Fantasy IV is their favorite character. And then last comment comes to us from Rita's Revenge at Rita's Revenge on Twitter, who says, I actually created a female elementalist on Guild Wars 1 with Rita's green hair, and on Dragon Age Origins, I installed a mod to make green hair for my female mage character, because Rita's Revenge, I don't know if you've checked out this person on Twitter, they actually are a Rita cosplayer, and they actually speed run Final Fantasy IV dressed as Rita. Like that's something they do. So it's just like, I love this. Like we got a big train for Rita. Rita's actually a great character from Final Fantasy IV, by the way. She's one of the 2 kind of like major characters that you have kind of at the beginning of the game. And she basically has the ability to summon like all these gods, essentially. Like that's kind of like her contribution to the party, as Ryan Craig kind of alluded to. But yeah, I thought it was funny just kind of having this giant Rita train kind of going, because I think she's actually a really cool character. I'm glad people brought it up.
Yeah. I've never heard of this character. I'm sorry. And wow, I can't believe there's such a following behind this character to the point of speedrunning and cosplaying as her. That's super neat to see.
For sure. But yeah, it definitely, it's not very often we actually get speedrunners ready into the show, Garrett, but you'd love to see it, that's for sure. But anyways, I think that's going to round it up. I think we had a pretty good list of characters here. And I think we had a pretty good conversation. It was a pretty good
list of characters. We had a great amount of recommendations and choices from the audience too. This was a very, very good episode, representing all the female characters out there in RPGs.
And the crazy thing is we just barely scratched the surface with this topic. Like there are so many more you could pick from, which is just cool to see for the genre. And I'm sure we're going to get many more before the year's out. But before we go, Garrett plugs go.
You can follow me at Twitter at Bland Explosion. You can also find me on the Nintendo Shack, part of the Play Some Video Games Podcast Network, which we release on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Cast, whatever you get your podcasts in. And we're also on live every Thursday nights over at twitch.tv/PSVG.
Very nice, my friend. As for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. You can find us on Twitter at Carpool Gaming, on YouTube at youtube.com/Carpool Gaming, on Patreon at patreon.com/Carpool Gaming, and on podcast services around the globe. So, for Garrett Bland, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been the 46th level of the RPG Cave, and we're out.
Bye-bye.